Hello, everybody. This is me here in Boileau, Quebec. This is the Veganic Growers Hour number 8, the 8th edition. Wow, I can't believe we're already there. It's May 12th. Here in Boileau, Quebec, it is crazy hot. It's 29 degrees Celsius. That's 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just nutty. We're in the middle of just a crazy heat wave. It was over 30 degrees yesterday. It's going to be over 30 degrees the next few days. So it's just nuts. It feels like summer. I got my t-shirt on, my shorts. It's not going to last. Anyway, we continue on. So here at La Ferme de l'Aube, at our farm here, we have just planted our first peas, our first mesclun, our first carrots, radishes. We transplanted head lettuces, onions, both bunching onions and bulbing onions, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, artichokes. So yeah, it's going along. All those crops that we could bring in as soon as the soil could be worked, we've put them in, and we are cruising right along to our last frost date. We're not there yet, but we're cruising right along. Because of season extension practices, we've been very fortunate to be able to harvest our first mesclun from the greenhouse. So that's very cool. We've been eating fresh salads all week long. We also transplanted in our greenhouse tomatoes. We have 2 different kinds of cherry tomatoes and a big heirloom tomato called Mountain Princess. And today I just sowed and seeded our first beans, our first climbing beans. So very cool. It's cruising right along. We also have been preparing many beds as we continue on, as we roll on towards the last frost date and the planting of tender annuals. So if you're out there, go ahead and send a message over if you can, and let me know where your name, where you're from, and what your temperature is too. Maybe it's just as hot over there as it is here. All right. Well, tonight I'm going to start with a question because it's particularly appropriate, I think, for beginning before we even transplant in our tender annuals, we need to have our beds or our plots prepared. So this opening question came from Trish from British Columbia. And she says, seems like many farmers are talking about no dig and adding compost. Even though I have listened to discussions on no dig, I am not sold on the idea, nor do I have much compost. What is your opinion? Hello, Judd from Napierville. Yeah, 29 degrees. Crazy. So no dig. So when we first started the farm here back in 2014, we bought in 2014, 2015, the gardening season, I was really sold on this idea of not no dig, but no tillage. So John Jevons, in his book, How to Grow More Vegetables Than You Ever Thought Humanly Possible, something like that, he talks about a method of double digging. So we tried to do this, and wow. So to do a 50-foot row by 2.5 feet wide, it took us forever. It was crazy amount of work. And so that field that we did that, we have some of the worst weeds. We call them native flora here. Worst native flora problems of any other gardens that we have, especially couch grass, which is got root systems about this long. It just keeps coming back year after year. So that particular thing didn't work. So I guess it kind of depends on how you want to start. If you already have a garden and you already have a garden plot, then really you probably don't have to dig ever again. Maybe you just need to grat the soil a little bit to take out some of those native flora bunches and put them aside so that you can create a nice planting space for your plants to start growing, so they're not trying to compete with those incredible root systems of all native plants like dandelion or yarrow or daisy. I mean, these things have amazing root systems, or the crouch grass that I was talking about. So if you have an established garden, really maybe all you have to do is that. Just take out the native flora, and put down a little bit of compost, and go ahead and plant away. So it's pretty simple. And as long as you maintain it every year, the same plot, then yeah, it's going to get easier to work. Your soils are going to get deeper. You're going to have a few less native flora problems than you would when you first start. You're definitely not going to have really big mats of weeds if you're maintaining it every year. But if it's the first time, and I think this has something to do more with what Trish is asking. So if it's the first time that you're planting a garden, can you do it no dig or no till? And, I have yet to see a really excellent result from someone who just took native terrain, would put maybe a bunch of straw and then plant in that, hoping that the straw would be enough to suffocate the native flora so that you could get your crops to grow. I don't particularly like it. My best and favorite option, and I'm going to refer you all back to Veganic Growers Hour number 4, which was March 17th, where I actually talked about garden preparation from minute 22:30 to minute 40. And there I spoke about my favorite method, which is I like to put a piece of black plastic on whatever I want to use, and let all the native flora cook for about 3 or 4 weeks. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to cook all the stuff that's on top. It's going to start composting it in, but it's not going to die. The roots are still going to be there. But what it'll allow you to do is then if you take like a grad or a pitchfork or something, and then you take those root systems out, it's going to be a little bit easier to do so. Now, you can also rototill for the very first time. You can go ahead and run a rototiller through it. It'll bring up those. It doesn't really chop it more than it brings up those root systems. So it's going to bring it up to the surface. Then you can just pull them out, put them into the hedgerow, put them into a native flora strip that you have for all the insects that you want to live there, and go ahead and mark your beds and plant away. That is my favorite option. You do need to have compost. So Trish, to answer your question, as important as it is to garden plan and to figure out what we're going to plant and figure out all your dates, it's also important to work in how you're going to develop your self-compost, or where are you going to find it. If you don't have access to a place that sells live compost or vegan compost, then you need to see if you can find a place that sells the materials to build your compost. So you need anywhere from 2 parts green to 1 part brown, or 1 part green to 1 part brown. Anyway, high nitrogen material with a high carbon material, mix it together, you make your own compost. So chipped branch wood, dry leaves, green grass, alfalfa straw. Those are examples of the 2 former of browns and the 2 latter of greens. So see what you can find if you can't. And then, of course, you can put in all your kitchen scraps. All as good vegans, we eat a lot of vegetables, so we always have a lot of kitchen scraps. Put that in there, and it should break down if you don't have compost yourself. But really, you do need to have compost too. So to answer your question, I'm not really sold on no dig either. We work the soil every year because we like to give the plants we're trying to grow the best shot that they can have. And it's for sure by the end of the season underneath the corn. And we're going to talk about tonight tomatoes and eggplant and peppers and ground cherries. There is going to be native flora that pushes up in there, and we just let it go. At that point, it doesn't matter. Once the plants are developed, established, growing bountifully, it really doesn't matter as much what's underneath there. Really, it's between now or a few weeks ago, which was as soon as your soil can be work date, between now and your warm and settled date, and about the first few weeks of July, where we really try to take out the native flora intensively. And some crops are going to be more needy than others in taking out that native flora. Like when you have carrots and you're seeding carrots, you might have to go ahead and weed them a couple of times before the carrots get big enough to create the canopy to outcompete the native flora. But even then, the native flora always comes in because that's what they do. They want to live there. So am I sold on no dig? No. Am I sold on no deep tillage? Absolutely. There's no reason to have a huge tractor to deep till. It's just absolutely unnecessary. One final point on all this is once you have your beds established, make sure they're always permanent, and then you will always have the same space that you're growing in. You keep building up your soil, which in the end is what we're trying to accomplish. So there you go, Trish. All right, so we're rolling along to our last frost date. So how do you even know what your last frost date is? So the best resource out there is the Farmer's Almanac online, the old Farmer's Almanac. They've been doing work on dates and moons and all sorts of wonderful stuff for the last about 125, 130 years. And what they have online is they have an average from 1980 to 2010, every single zip code within the United States and Canada. It might even be in Europe too, I don't know, but for sure in the United States and Canada. So you can plug in your zip code and they will give you what they from those dates, from that 30-year period, what is your average last frost date. What I found out is that only matters so much, because here our average frost date is the 25th of May, but we've had frost as late as the 29th of May, 6th of June, 13th of June. One year we even had one the 21st of June. So more important than what some website tells you is the last frost date is your own specific knowledge in your own specific area. So if you don't have one yet, buy an indoor-outdoor thermometer, one that is wireless, that you can put the transmitter somewhere cold part in your field, or even one with just a probe that you can leave down in the coldest part of your field, your garden, your plot. Basically, your coldest parts are going to be where it slopes and where it dips to a valley. That is going to be your coldest part, especially if there's a north slope on the other side. If it dips towards the north slope, that is going to be very, very cold. So you need to try to figure this out for yourself. And again, it's an average. That's why it's only such a good date. And when so many garden books and so much advice talks about, oh, it's your last frost date. Your last frost date is just an average date that just, it is only so good as a date. I don't even know about a better way to say it other than it's just a date. Because the next day it could be 1, but it didn't freeze, but it's still too cold to plant your tender annuals. They don't like that. So your last frost date, it is important enough, but not as important as as soon as soil can be work date and your warm and settled date, which we're going to talk about next time. But it is important for a few different things. So as we're catching towards, and it's very important as we're kind of discussing our garden plan and our garden calendar that we've set up in the beginning of the year. So when we're trying to get all of our seedlings, especially if we're starting our own seedlings, trying to get them ready for a specific date, we do look at the last frost date. So the last frost date here is the 25th of May, like I just said. So if we're going to go ahead and say, want to get our tomatoes and eggplants and peppers and ground cherries into now we have caterpillar tunnels, so they're protected a little bit. But if we want to get them in there, we're going to try to have the seedlings ready right about the last frost date. That's probably the most important reason why that date is important, because it's for your plantification. Now, what we tend to do is we try to hit it at the end of that span. So if the 25th, say on Monday, we're going to look at planting on the Saturday, which might be at the 30th, right? So, and even this year, we decided to press it even a little later because we've been getting hit so hard late in the season, late in May, early June with the frost, that now we're not even going to plant our tomatoes until the first week of June. It's all about planning. It's all about planning. So once we know when we're going to want to go ahead and plant on that, say, that last frost date, let's say we live in a place where really it's the last frost date and then it gets warm. And that happens. In Arizona, it was a little bit like that. We had our last frost date about the same as here, 23rd, 24th of May. But then after that, the nights got to be 11, 12, 13 degrees. So, or 50, 55 degrees. So it was time. It was time to plant everything. So if we're talking seedlings, the biggest thing that we can do prior to that last frost date, or even on that last frost date just before we plant, is to acclimate our seedlings. And to do this, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get them accustomed to nighttime temperatures a little bit more what they're going to experience when they get put into the ground. So if it is, they've been growing most little seedlings of the tender annuals like peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, again, they really don't want to have nights below 15 degrees while they're growing. And that's 60 degrees Fahrenheit while they're growing. So when we're trying to get them outside, it may still get down to 10 degrees. And for tomatoes, it's not a problem. And for ground cherries, it's not a problem. And even for peppers, it's not a big problem. And eggplants, they don't really mind 10 degrees. Even if it gets down to 8 or 7 or 6, they don't really mind. They don't want to be down there that long because they won't do much. They'll just sit there and wait and hope that one day it'll get warmer. But when we're calculating that, and we're seeing that, and we're looking at our long-range forecasts where we live, well, then we want to start acclimating the plants. We want to acclimate them to lower nighttime temperatures, and we want to also acclimate them to real conditions outside. So say if they're being grown in the house or being grown in a greenhouse, they're completely protected from everything. They're protected from winds, they're protected from rain, they're protected from insects, they're protected from pretty much everything. And it's warm, the level of warmth, especially if they're in their little pots, that black pot, it heats up their roots, so it's going to experience temperatures that are warm. So what we want to do is we want to get them outside, get them on a pallet, put them in the sun, let them experience full sun and see how they react. Sometimes they'll wilt and they know that they may need to come back in. They didn't like it very much. Try to acclimate them on a day that's not full sun. Sometimes you don't have any choice like we do now. Sometimes you're going to just have to stick them outside. But acclimate them, get them accustomed to the real field temperatures that they're going to experience when they're out. So great example. You have a tomato. It's your last frost date. You want to plant. You're going to want to acclimate them 7 days before. So you're going to want to get their nights down to about 10 degrees, 9 degrees, 8 degrees. Put them outside. If it stays that warm at night, leave them outside. Just cover them so little mammal beings don't eat your tomato plants, or worms don't get in and eat your tomato plants. So if you do that for 7 days, then it is for sure that you're giving your seedling a better shot at thriving as soon as it goes in. Because what we're trying to avoid is checking. And checking is the idea that when you put your plant into the ground, it's going to want to then automatically take its roots, start feeling its way, look for the nutrients it needs, and start growing. If it checks, that means that it does the same thing. It puts the little roots out and it goes, oh, too cold. Oh, that has something I don't like. And then it just sits there. And it sits there for a little while. Usually, even if we give everything its best shot, that's what will happen anyway, at least for a few days. Usually it takes about 4 or 5 days for a plant to figure out that it likes life in the soil and it's going to start growing. But sometimes it can be right away. They can go in, it's 13, 14, 15 degrees, and then they just take off. They just go, they explode. This is really what we're aiming for. Plan your dates accordingly as you can. It doesn't always have to do with the last frost date, but again, it's a very important date for your planning. So I think I got around to all that. So yeah, so tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, ground cherries. So those we've talked about, but also other things that really don't want to get super, super cold, but are kind of crops that we think about as liking colder temperatures, like celery or some of the brassicas. So let's say you weren't prepared to plant as soon as the soil could be work date, like we were here, like we just planted our broccoli and our cabbages. But let's say you're not ready. Well, those plants don't mind experiencing, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees. They don't want to freeze once they go in, but 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees is fine. Celery is an interesting one because it likes really, really cold, kind of fresh conditions, but it doesn't like below 10. If it goes below 10, it stays there too long, it will automatically bolt. So there you go. You need to learn your vegetable crops. Everything is different. Not everything is the same. Every single variety has its own specific needs. and good Google research on every specific crop that you're trying to grow, a good gardening book with crop descriptions and telling you this information, which is a little bit hard to find, I find. There's a really good one in French by Yves Gagnon called, je pense c'est de légumière, and it's about actually growing all the different vegetables, and it's a really good one. But I haven't found one in English that is that fantastic. So anyway, think about all these things when you're looking at your brassicas, say, and you're looking at those you're looking at your last frost date, then yeah, those are, if you didn't plant before those, you can definitely get in then. But let's go back to tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants and ground cherries. These are what we would call tender annuals. They don't want to freeze. They really don't want to experience nights below maybe 7 degrees if we can help it. They'll tolerate it. And sometimes you'll notice this, like a lot of people have this habit of planting on the long weekend in May, but then a few days later it can get really cold and the plants look awful. They start to yellow. They don't look good at all. This is because the temperatures were too cold at night. And really, this is what we're looking for. It's the nighttime temperatures. The daytime temperatures, they can go up to 30, like today, they're 30, but they're still going to go down to 10 tonight. So it's not, it would be okay to plant, but then if you look 4 or 5 days ahead, you'll see that it's going to be 4 degrees at night or 3 degrees at night, and it might even freeze again. So because we're not even close to what we consider our last frost date. So, well, there you go. I guess it's even a little bit more important than I give it credit for. Last frost date. It's also time to establish your hardy perennials. All of the perennials that are hardy, so if I'm thinking about chives, lemon balm, mint, or kind of multi-year crops like strawberries, asparagus, some of our bushes like haskap or camerisier, Saskatoon berry, things like this. We don't want to try and establish them until after last frost date, even though once they're planted, they can survive a frost. And haskap is a really interesting one because its flowers can survive lower than -7. But if we plant them originally before the last frost, we could freeze them. Now, more than likely, they will grow back. But anytime we hit them like that, it's going to hit them with a freeze. It is going to cause them to not be as vigorous. And they may not even make it through the winter, even though they might be rustic or they might be tolerant to our specific planting zones. So for your hardy perennials, go ahead and wait until your last frost date, all the ones that I just mentioned. And that is actually a question from Penny from Ottawa. I have many perennials in pots. Can I plant them now? She has lavender. She had oregano. And yeah, absolutely. This is exactly the time. At the last frost date, go ahead and plant them. Wait until then. Don't plant them before. So do I plant now? No. Wait until your last frost date. Now, if it's your last frost date in Ottawa, go ahead and plant it. But what about things in the cucurbit family? What about cucumbers? We love cucumbers and summer squash, winter squash, melons. Now, these particular crops, they really want to wait about 2 to 3 weeks after the last frost date. And maybe you've done this before. I know I have, and I'm always... I kick myself every year. I mean, we're farmers, so we're trying to get people produce as early as possible. So we're always trying to push the envelope. We plant summer squash early. Some years we've even planted it like the 17th of May, and then it would freeze. And like last year, it froze. It froze really hard. I had 2 rows of 70 summer squash plants, and I lost 2/3. So what's the point? It doesn't make any sense. Cucumbers are another one. Cucumbers are really sensitive to cold soil temperatures. They do not like temperatures below 13 degrees. I would even say that they really don't like temperatures under 16 degrees until they're established. And yeah, so there you go. Don't plant your cucumbers until the warm and settle date, which we're going to talk about next time in 2 weeks. Winter squash, they're a little bit less fussy, but again, they don't want to freeze. And I would wait even until, say, a week or two after the last frost date. It doesn't have to be the warm and settled date. What I mean by the warm and settled date, in case anybody is curious, is that these are when the nights stay above 13 degrees, basically. And that's when all of that cucurbit family, also things like basil, really would thrive. Okay, so let's talk about something. This is going to come up question here soon, but let's talk about companion planting. This is also another big one. And here's something else I am not sold on. So companion planting, one really, really great example is planting your basil with your tomatoes. Okay. So a question came up earlier today when I was having a correspondence with a friend of mine, and they were asking about, like, well, what about crops that are shade, that can tolerate shade or want full sun, or what can you say about that, or should we talk about that, and what we were working on? And in my head, everything wants full sun, unless you're trying to go ginseng or mushrooms. Pretty much it's all wants full sun as much as you can give it. Now, because we sell seeds and we also used to sell plants, the recommendation that I would always give to people, or that Melanie and I would always give to people, would be at least give it 6 hours full sun per day. So there you go. If that means there's part shade, well, there's part shade, but it's not about how much part shade can you get, because people probably have a lot of different ideas on what part shade is. Me, I want sun. So 6 hours of sun. Any less than that, try whatever you want. I don't think your production is going to be fantastic, but you can try it. You're going to have better luck with the crops that have a colder tolerance. So you're going to have better luck with your brassica family. You're going to have better luck with celery. You're going to have better luck with your greens, your lettuces. Mustard greens are also brassicas. So yeah, so you can try that if you want. But really, realistically, if you're planting your garden spot, try for 6 hours per day of full sun. If there's a space around your house, or if you have a big field, 6 hours per day is what you're looking for. Excuse me. So companion planting. So this, again, it brings me back to tomatoes and basil. It's classic, and you can actually Google this, and people will say, oh yeah, you should grow your basil under your tomatoes. It works great. There's space under the tomatoes, and basil grows big. And well, yeah, I've done this, and here's the thing. Tomatoes can handle being planted at the last frost date. They really can tolerate better than almost any of the other solanaceae that we were talking about, peppers, eggplants, and golden and ground cherries. They can tolerate 3, 4, 5 degrees. So if you go ahead and have 3, 4, and 5 degrees, and then I see something came over, and I'm going to address that you're going to find really interesting. 3, 4, 5 degrees for your tomatoes, and you want to plant them. Well, if you're going to companion plant it, you're really going to want to plant your basil pretty much at the same time. If you wait, then the tomato canopy is going to get quite big. You're going to put your basil in full shade, and basil does not like full shade. It does not want full shade. It wants to grow in full sun. Now, when everything is established, when the basil is established, it can handle the shade, but it really doesn't want to have that humidity and that foliage of the tomato plant kind of hovering over it. It can bring all sorts of fungal problems. It can bring all sorts of powdery black mildew is one that's notorious for basil planted under tomato plants. So companion plant, this is what I suggest. And this actually is a question that comes from Matt from Toronto. What is the appropriate spacing for everything? Well, the appropriate spacing for everything is exactly what would be the distance in between each other. So if a cherry tomato plant, we can go ahead and plant cherry tomato plants 12 inches apart from each other. So if you want to plant a basil plant, which basil plants can be 6 inches apart from each other. Some people can even put them closer, but you can have a plantation or a plot or a circle of basil at 6 inches apart, and they're going to love it. They're going to have all sorts of fun together. But between the two, if you have a tomato and a basil, then you're going to want to keep them 12 inches apart, because that is the distance that tomatoes want to have from someone else. And that someone in this particular case is basil. Another great example is take the brassica family. So let's say you have broccoli plants and you're trying to go full heads. You want to give them about 16 inches. But kale plants, better example, kohlrabi only needs about 6 inches. So how far apart? Well, you're going to need to keep them 16 inches apart, because that's what the broccoli is going to want. So what ends up happening, I believe, and this isn't scientifically proven, but what I think what happens is if plants get planted too close together and the root systems touch each other, then they kind of just stall. They stunt. And then because it's their nature, they're going to want to go ahead and go up to flower and to seed as fast as they can after that. Because to them, in their minds, they believe, in their plant minds, in their physiological, that's funny, is plant mind, physiological nature of the plant, because what it is trying to do is reproduce, it's going to want to do that as fast as possible. But if you give it enough space, if we give broccoli 16 inches apart to get full heads of broccoli, and you cut the broccoli, then you're taking the flower head off. It can't go to seed, and then it'll start putting out side shoots for you. Classic example of what happens with all broccoli. Same thing happens with cabbages. You can go ahead and plant a cabbage plant. You can cut the main head of the cabbage off, and then little cabbages will come around. Okay, so there's been a few people I want to say hello. So Meg from Quebec City, hello. Margaret from East Central Saskatchewan, 19 Celsius and 50 millimeters of rain. Wow. Okay, we need 50 millimeters of rain. Fireweed from Denman Island in BC, cold spring out here. Hello. And Nancy Love, it is so hot here and arid. We have to use shade cloth on many crops. Okay, so how hot and how arid? My farm in Arizona never got any rain at all, but we irrigated every morning and every afternoon. So it created a different microclimate because it was creating humidity, it was creating moisture. Incredibly difficult to get lettuces to grow, incredibly difficult to get carrots to grow. But where here I don't have great production with, say, sweet peppers or tomatoes or eggplants outside, they go in our caterpillar tunnels. That's where I grow most of my tomatoes. The pepper plants were huge. They were 3 feet tall. They were loaded. Never used shade cloth in Arizona. The days always got over 40 degrees during the summertime. The nights staying in the high teens, so 17, 18, 19 degrees Celsius. It was nuts. But again, and this is what somebody actually told me when I first moved to Arizona. I said, as long as you irrigate, anything will grow. Well, and so that's what I did. I put everything on a timer, and everything was watered an hour and a half in the morning. Everything was watered was watered an hour and a half in the morning, and every afternoon for an extra 45 minutes. Everything. So 120 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that's pretty hot. And yeah, I could see where there might need shade cloth and where you might have to create shade canopy. Excellent example. Thank you for sharing that. How often do you irrigate, Nan? I would be curious to know. So please write that in. Maybe you're going to say all the time. 6 degrees on Denman Island, BC. Wow, you guys are in the middle of winter, and here we're in the middle of summer. This is crazy. Okay, so send us some rain. We'll send you some heat. How about that? Good swap. Okay, so that was the last frost date. We're going to go ahead and keep talking about the planting of the tender annuals. Thanks, Fireweed. Yeah, send us some rain. I would appreciate it. So, all about the nighttime temperatures. So when we're looking at trying to plant the tender annuals, we're really trying to see when the nights are consistently 10 degrees, whether that is the last frost date or not. Again, the last frost date is really just a date. So what's our proper planting procedure? Try to say that 5 times fast. Proper planting procedure for pretty much everything is the same. Clear it of native flora, plant your plant. It can be, okay, so I watched a video of Ruth Stout, and I don't know if y'all know Ruth Stout, but Ruth Stout is a woman who created a system of no-till, and she put hay, kind of used hay, spoiled hay, down a layer of 12 inches, 30 centimeters. And she's an amazing woman. When she did the video, she was 91. She'd been growing that way for 20 years. She had written a few books at that time. She had consulted, I don't know how many people, maybe 2,000, 5,000, 6,000, was asked to speak at garden clubs. Anyway, for her system worked fine. She said anytime she saw maybe through or native flora passing through, she would just put down more spoiled hay. So she needed a lot of spoiled hay. When she wanted to plant, she just kind of moved the hay out of the way and she planted. She would plant her tomato in the native earth and then put the hay back. What she did say, and I think this is really interesting, is she said that her soil stayed very, very cold, very, very long. So her asparagus, she really didn't get into June. Whereas us, we don't put straw on our asparagus. It's up, and I'm going to be cutting tomorrow. So I'm going to get my first bunch of asparagus tomorrow to eat. How's that? So a month earlier by not putting straw. Now we do put straw on some things like garlic, and it does keep the ground very, very cold. So the proper planting procedure. My ideal way would be to create an open space, put your plant. If it's a tomato plant, it wants to be 12 inches away. Now, if you want to leave native flora around it, I mean, that's up to you, then do that. Leave the native flora around, but give the tomato 12 inches of breathing room at first. I would even probably make more distance, because who just plants one tomato? So if you have 10 tomatoes and you need, say, 12 inches all the way around all the tomatoes, we'll clear all of the native flora out. And again, like I said before about companion planting, anything can be planted next to each other, really pretty much anything. There has been no good scientific data on companion planting, but there also isn't that fantastic of scientific data what you cannot plant together. Now, supposedly there are some plants that exhibit some hormones or exhibit some toxins that make other plants not want to grow. But you know what? In all my years of growing, I have never seen a plant growing completely by itself. Like imagine a pine, okay? You grow a pine tree, pine needles fall. There's almost really nothing underneath it. I have never seen that growing vegetables ever in my life. So if anything is doing that, causing something to not grow well, I've never seen it. So try whatever it is you want. If it's a plant, plant it with plants. If you're seeding it, go ahead and create your space for seeds. Another interesting companion idea to talk about would be mesclun mix. So mesclun mix is a mixture of, say, baby kale, mustard greens, and lettuces. A lot of times you'll get this package of seed together in one package called mesclun mix. Now, very interesting is mustard greens will usually germinate faster than lettuces, about 3 to 4 days, where lettuces are about 6 to 8. And mustard greens will grow to cuttable size in about 21 days, where lettuces can take anywhere from 28 to 35, right? So a week to 2 weeks later. Sorry, have a little water. So if you plant it as a mesclun mix from the seed package, excuse me, if you plant it in mesclun mix as a seed package, then what's going to end up happening is the mustard greens are going to grow very, very vigorously, and the lettuces are going to get trapped underneath. Now, because lettuces can tolerate a little bit of shade, there's going to be some lettuce under there. You can find them, but they're going to be small. They're not going to be fantastic. And the mustard greens are going to grow really, really big, really fast and create a canopy over them. So what's better, and what we do here when we create mesclun, because we sell a lot of mesclun mix and we actually are fortunate to be able to grow it all year long, we'll plant our lettuce, just our lettuce mix. Say, just for example, we'll say we'll plant a 5-foot plot of lettuce mix. And then after it, we'll plant, say, a foot of kale, baby kale, a foot of arugula, and a foot of mustard green. One of my favorite is ruby streaks. But we'll plant the mustards a week later. And what will end up happening is the lettuces will have time to grow, and then the mustards will establish, and then everything will be ready at the same time. And because you're giving it sort of that distance, like lettuces and mustard greens from seed really only need about an inch or two in distance away from each other, then you're giving lettuces full sun to grow at their speed, and you're giving mustard greens full sun to grow at their speed. So again, full sun, better than part shade. I'm going to answer a couple questions. Nancy Love, have to do irrigation by hand, so not as much as I would like, but plant close, and green mulch helps. So do only one time, or can even skip a day. We'll get drip when I can. Yeah, so that I would suggest. If you live in a dry environment and it gets that hot, Nancy Love said 120 degrees Fahrenheit, so 50 degrees Celsius. Yeah, mulch. And if you can find green mulch, that's even better. So if you can find organic or at least non-treated, non-GMO alfalfa, that stuff is the best. And, it's green, but it's still fibrous. So I don't know what its carbon to nitrogen ratio is, maybe 26, 28 to 1, but it's almost perfect to use just as it is. And yeah, once your plants get established, if you mulch, and even here in Quebec, where we can have super hot summers, if you have those really, really hot, dry times, go ahead and mulch. And we're going to talk about this also next time when we talk warm and settled date. We're going to talk about maintenance of cultures, which cultures actually like straw. And I've kind of experimented with everything. I mean, for sure, I put straw underneath all of my cucurbits, because by doing that, the winter squash won't be touching the ground, won't rot. Same with the cucumbers, same with the melons, specifically the melons. I've also mulched my tomatoes and eggplants, and ground cherries I always mulch, peppers, potatoes. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Here we have a little bit bigger issue, because here, if we put it on too fast, if we put mulch on too fast, like the example I just said from Ruth Stout, the soils will stay cold. It'll trap the cold temperature, and the sun won't be able to beat down in. But if you have just those intense sunshine, then yeah, go ahead and green hay mulch. I think that's great. I think you got it, man. And doing by hand, yeah, what would really be awesome, you'll say, we'll get drip when I can. If you can, you put that drip by your plants, you put the straw on top, and then you just turn it on. And then really all you need to do is dig through the straw, put your hand in the dirt. If you still feels wet, you don't need to irrigate. And by using drip, it's going to be that much more efficient for you, because it must be really hard to try to water can through the straw to get down to the plant, to get down to the roots that they want. But anyway, thank you for sharing. Jerry Snelling, here in 7A, I put the hay against the plant. It seems to cause the tomatoes send out more roots. Yeah, absolutely, because tomatoes, and I'm going to mention that here in a minute about proper planting procedure. Tomatoes, their entire stem has little rootlets coming off them. So if you look at the root, or if you look at the stem of a tomato, it just kind of looks hairy. Well, all of that is roots. And a really interesting story, when I was in Costa Rica, they had such a big problem. I was in Puerto Viejo at a veganic permaculture farm, and we were trying to grow tomatoes. And he said the only way you could really get tomatoes to grow was to lie them down to plant them. I was like, what? How does that work? That doesn't make any sense. But yeah, he would lie them down, and because of all of those hairs, it would just root into the ground like that. And then the tomato would then come up at its leisure, like as it wanted. yeah, wherever it's warm, that makes a lot of sense. Because my guess is when you try to pull the straw away again, when you're living in California or say Arizona, then it's going to have all the roots attached to it. So absolutely. Another really, really fantastic one, pretty much wherever you are, and this is probably the best use of, say, using straw mulch and planting, is using straw mulch and planting your potatoes just underneath the straw mulch. You know, you have your native soil, maybe even has some native flora. You put your potato, you put a bunch of straw, especially if it's spoiled straw, wet straw, or hay, wet hay on top, maybe 12 inches, and then your potatoes will grow out. You can even, there's even systems where as the potato is growing, you can just keep putting more hay. And when you want your potatoes, you dig underneath, you got your bigger potatoes, then you dig the middle section, you got your other potato. There you go. You can kind of see. So yeah, it really is determinant of where you live. If you live, and my guess is the folks from the islands of Vancouver, where there are a lot of slugs, if you're using a lot of mulch, you're going to have problems with more slugs. They like it a lot. They like to be in there and hang out, and then they're going to eat your plants. It can also create more pathogenic problems for the plants. So you're going to have to watch what you do. But again, no matter where I've lived and where I've been, when you're first planting the plant, remove the native flora, put your plant, let it establish, and you'll know what I mean when it's happening if you haven't done this before. As soon as it's thriving and growing well, then really you can probably do whatever you want. You cannot read it anymore if you want. You can undersow it if you want, with say like an annual clover. You can put hay mulch, you can put straw mulch, you can put wood chips, chip branch wood, dry leaves. At that point, you can really do everything. Once growing, it's growing. That's about the best I can say. Last frost date, only so important. You can go ahead and plant things like brassicas that just make sure it doesn't freeze. Maybe wait a few days after, make sure the temperatures are stabilized at over 10 degrees Celsius to really optimize how your Solanaceae are going to grow well, your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplant, your hot peppers. And we're going to talk about next time, like I've already mentioned, about the warm and settle date, how you want to wait for things like basil and corn, cucumbers, melons, even hot peppers. The hotter it is outside. So Nan, if you like hot peppers, I hope you plant hot peppers. Jerry, if you like hot peppers, plant hot peppers, because the hotter it is, the hotter your hot peppers are. There you go. That's pretty cool. I like that. So, all right. So that was the planting of the tender annuals, last frost date. Continuing on to, okay, so here we are, and we're starting to think about our first harvest. But how do you know? How do you know when your first radishes or turnips or kale or peas are ready? Okay. So radishes, you'll see them. They'll start small. Well, they start as leaves, but then they start small, and then they start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And how do you know? If they get too big, we already know they crack, or they just too spicy. We really don't want to eat them. So how do you know? Well, pull one out of the ground and try it, even if it's a little smaller. Best word of advice I can say about all vegetables: picking a little smaller is usually better than picking a little bigger. However, saying that, sometimes if you pick the radishes too small, they'll still be spicy also. Turnips, no. And turnips can even get like salad turnips, or like the white turnips. They can get quite a bit bigger. But the best thing is to do is just try it. If it's the taste that you're looking for in a radish, and you see a few of them, if you've planted a plot, say 5 feet or 20 feet or 100 feet, and they're the size that and it's the taste that you're looking for, and they're a pretty good size, well, then harvest them. That's it. It doesn't matter, even if they're a little smaller. However, what you will see, and I've noticed this a lot, especially with younger farmers, you'll see bunches of these really small radishes, where really, if they could have just waited maybe another 6 or 7 days, waited another week till the next farmer's market, they would be that much better. Especially live in a place where it's cool or where it rains, like up there in Saskatchewan or over there in Vancouver. I don't know if you can grow good radishes over there in 7A or where it gets up to 120 degrees, but maybe earlier, maybe a long plant your radishes. Your greens. Now, greens are one because mustard greens, and I'm thinking about not Asian greens, but the other kinds of mustard greens. I think the Latin is Juncia, as opposed to Brassica rapa, which is going to be like your Kometsuna or your Mizuna mustard green or things like that. Mizuna, I guess, would be the same. Anyway, when it's smaller, you want to start cutting it. So think about how you see it if you were to get a mesclun mixed salad at a restaurant, or if you were to buy it in a mix in a clamshell at the grocery store if you've never grown it before. You want to start harvesting it when it's small, because if you don't, it's going to get really tall really fast. Baby kale, on the other hand, is really, really nice at baby stage, but all kale will eventually try to make a full fan leaf of kale. So you can let it go if you want, and then it's just a different flavor. Instead of eating it maybe fresh as a whole leaf like you can baby kale, you might need to cut it small, or then you can saute it. So it's really what you're looking for, but that is pretty easy. So that's kind of how you know to differentiate between that. But what I've noticed with mustard greens, especially when we start growing them now, and here you got a great example. I've been harvesting mesclun a little bit smaller than I normally would, because wow, I mean, it's 36, 37 degrees Celsius in the greenhouse by 10 o'clock, and it stays there. Thankfully, we have a fan. And we will go ahead and need to start harvesting it, because if not, it's going to start bolting. Like arugula is a great example. It will just bolt. Instead of getting too big and really, really spicy, it'll just put a flower stalk up. I'm going to answer a question here from Jerry. Do you grow head lettuce, salad mix? We grow both. Every year, we have a half-acre farm. We grow about 600 heads of lettuce every year. And the salad mix that we grow, we'll grow about three actual mixes during the season, 3 early in the season, so up until about July, and then we'll take a week off, and then we'll plant again in August, another 2. So about 5 50-foot rows of salad mix, mesclun mix, and then 600 heads of lettuce. And what we do here is that there's a time when seeding baby lettuce, no, we don't grow Salanova. Don't like it, never liked it, don't really like baby heads of lettuce. We grow 13 different kinds of head lettuces, pretty much everything from red leaf to butterhead to bib to summer crunch, summer crisp, romaine. And what I've noticed with lettuces, and this is really interesting, and I know Salanova is a very hot issue with farmers. Me, if I want a small head of lettuce, I just cut it smaller. But if I let it go, then I get a huge head. And yes, I do. Fireweed, do you have any favorite reds with lasting power? Magenta and Cherokee are 2 favorite reds. Cherokee is a really, these are both summer crisps. So wherever you live, I guess you're in the islands, it should do for you just fine. These are heat tolerant lettuces, Magenta and Cherokee, and they, being that they're summer crisp, their leaves are a little tougher than, say, like a red leaf, but they're awesome. Magenta, Cherokee, you got it. Those are my favorites. So where was I? So if you're, so there you go. So with lettuces, what we'll do in the middle of summer is we'll cut it when it's small, and then I'll break up the lettuce leaves, and I will put that into a salad mix with some, and I'll just seed mustard greens every few weeks so that we have some baby mustard greens to go with it. It's just easier at that point in the season, because we'll have a couple weeks where it'll be dry, and incredibly, and I didn't know this until we had such a severe drought. We ran out of water from our pond, and we were just done watering from our well a few years ago back. I let my lettuces go dry for 3 weeks. There was still moisture, because there's always moisture in our soils. It's not like where y'all live in California, but it was amazing how dry I let the lettuces go. And what was interesting is that the clients found that the crispness was better. They could, once I harvest them, now I always harvest. This is another little tip, and we are going to talk about harvesting in probably the next couple of episodes. But if anything wants to be cold, kept cold, so if you want to have your lettuce in the fridge, you're going to want to try and harvest it as soon as possible in the morning. So when I'm harvesting mesclun mix in June, I'm out at 5:15 in the morning harvesting mesclun mix. I'll go out there before breakfast. I'll harvest two Rubbermaid bins of mesclun, come up, go ahead and wash it, spin it dry, and put it right into the cool room, just like that. I won't bag it yet. I'll just get it in. Lettuces are a little bit less fussy, but even then, I mean, most of the greens I have harvested before 7 o'clock in the morning. So, and in Arizona, it was even worse. I was out at 4:15 in the morning harvesting mesclun mix. I even had a flashlight. Yeah, lettuce heads with roots on. Sure, if you want to pull out the whole thing. What I notice, and because I love this kind of stuff, if you cut the head and you really forget about it, next thing you know, guess what? Another head starts growing, because plant is not dead. It's just had its head cut off. Ooh, ouch. But it's not dead. It's still, the roots are still alive, so the plant is still going to produce. So what's really cool, I will leave those sort of cut rows of lettuce to then grow back and create shade for the soil, create space for the insects, and the leaves that then had died off are great food for the microorganisms and the worms and everybody else who lives in the soil. So, but I will also harvest those greens later in the season when I'm making my mesclun mix, because what ends up happening later in the season is that, and you've probably noticed this, as the days start getting shorter, the time for crops to come to maturity gets longer. So if a head of lettuce will come in peak of summer, say in 40 days, well, it's going to take 50 days into the fall, or until the late summer into the fall. Same with mesclun mix. Like in the summer, my mesclun mix, my mustard greens are up. I can harvest them in 21 days, almost without fault. But in the late summer or early fall, no, I don't harvest in the fall. So late summer, so we're talking about the first couple of weeks of September, those mustard greens are taking 35, 36, 37 days, almost a week to 10 days. So how you know to harvest in the spring is a little bit different than how you know to harvest in the fall. But there you go. So yeah, how do you know to harvest? Absolutely, my favorite and my best recommendation is just to try it right in the field. Like, there is nothing like growing your own and eating it right there. Nobody who is not a grower, I hope that was said right, nobody who is not a grower ever experiences that. Even if you buy food at the farm fresh, it's never as fresh as that. It's never like pulling a fresh pea off the vine and eating it right then. I don't even know if they can calculate how many nutrients are in there, because you would have to have the lab right there doing it right away, and it's already lost nutrients as soon as you did your little test on it. But you're getting it right in. So greatest thing in the world. So yeah, so we are getting towards the end of the show. How do you like that? That one went fast, really fast. I could have kept on talking. Okay, so what's going on here in the future? Next show, May 26th, as I've stated a couple of times, we're going to be talking about the warm and settle date, which by then, no matter where you live, where you are, your warm and settle date, which is usually 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost date, you can plant everything. Just everything should be able to be planted. That was going to be sensitive to a frost. But it's changing. And so we're going to talk about a little bit about this too. We live in an ever-changing climatic world. Here we are in a historic heat wave. Never in the history of Quebec, since records have been recorded, have we had this many 30-degree days in a row this early in the year. So so it's It's on top of us. I will answer that question just in a minute, Margaret. And we're also going to talk about maintenance of cultures. So things that will have been planted and starting to grow well, like pole beans and peas, how do we maintain them? What do we do for them? How do we stake them? How do we keep them living the way that they want? So Margaret, I'm going to go over time. No, I guess it's below. I started early. Missed the start. Did you cover onions? Well, we've already planted onions. So it depends on what you want to ask about onions. We start all of our onions from seed. We just transplanted them out. I'm going to share some pictures next Tuesday. And yeah, we grow bunching onions. We grow bulbing onions. We grow green onions. And we just planted over 5,000. So we pretty much do that every year. So if you want to ask me a question, I'd be more than happy to answer it. Otherwise, I'll give you a few seconds. Anyway, thank you, everyone. As always, it is a pleasure to be with you here every other Thursday night. I wish you a lot of luck in your gardens, in your small farms over this next couple of weeks. I hope the weather stays good for all of you. I hope by the next time I hope all of our last frost dates have passed, so we don't have to worry about those freezes that take out our tender annuals anymore. And peace. And I wish you all the best next couple of weeks. Thank you so much.